welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, Episode 8. And before we get to it, I will quickly touch on a comment I got on a video recently, which is kind of relevant here. I haven't really talked about prices at all on these videos. A couple of reasons why is because what's budget for one person is not budget for another person. Also, prices change all the time, sometimes incredibly drastically, in fact, as is the case with Shuko. Hey, that used to be a budget card, and if I had talked about that on a previous 10 cards video, people would think I was crazy. However, the comment I got on a video recently talking about banning cards, a person said the reserve list need to be banned for the same reason used to ban the Power 9. So I'm not going to get into the whole mentality of why we ban cards and all that. Of course, it's got nothing to do with this video. However, banning the entire reserve list is really silly, and I think people sort of have the wrong idea about the reserve list. I certainly am not the biggest fan of the reserve list. However, the first card I will be talking about today is on the reserve list. Conch Horn, 2-mana artifact, pay 1 and tap, sacrifice it, draw 2 cards, then put a card from your hand on top of your library. This is originally from Fallen Empires. I mean, it's only printed in Fallen Empires because, of course, it's on the reserve list, and it only costs $3.50. So anyone thinking, okay, a reserve list card must mean it cost $1,000 is pretty silly. That's not the case. They tend to be a little more expensive than most other cards, but they're also, a lot of them, not really that great. A lot of them are actually pretty bad, so just because a card's on the reserve list does not mean it's really powerful, and it does not mean it's really expensive. A lot of them are actually very affordable, as is Conch Horn. And I'm giving it a recommendation here because it is a very unique effect in a colorless option, right? I like to always mention cards in a colorless form that are doing something very specific. Now, of course, this is doing sort of a looting thing. It's not terrible as a draw option. I mean, it's not great either. If you're in a theme where you want to be sacrificing artifacts and stuff like that, maybe you can get it back out of your graveyard. It can get better, but where this is very important to take note of is any deck where you want stuff on top of your library, right? Because there's not very many effects outside of blue, which of course can do that fairly well. Any other color probably doesn't do it so well. And in fact, even if I was in, say, like a Yuriko deck, where I do have the blue options for putting stuff on top of my library, I might use this as well, because being able to put a specific card on top of your library can be really, really important. And it's not just on top of your library, it's also in your library, right? If anything is searching for stuff in your library or casting stuff from your library, this is a way to put a card on top of your library, which of course means it's in your library, right? So there's a whole lot of situations where you want to put a card from your hand on top of or into your library and in a colorless option, so that might be really, really important here. Next up, Collective Restraint, 3 and a blue enchantment, has the domain ability. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays X for each creature they control that's attacking you, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. So I have mentioned this card before. It is, I would say, reasonably popular in the Commander format. Of course, you want to be having lots of lands in play, but why I'm giving it a particular mention here is because a lot of decks can, without actually being a 5-color deck, have those land types in play, because of course Collective Restraint is only looking for the basic land types you control. So you don't have to be playing a 5-color deck in order for this card to be good. And in fact, even if you're just not screwing around at all, no shenanigans, just straight up playing a 3-color deck, now your opponents are going to have to pay 3 to attack you. That's pretty good, right? It's a Ghostly Prison on steroids, but of course it can only get better from there. And again, there's a lot of decks out there that are playing the Dryad of Elysian Grove effects, which now all my lands are those types, so my opponents will have to pay 5 to attack me. Pretty darn good. Let's talk about Collapsing Borders. 3 and a red enchantment also has the domain ability. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player gains 1 life for each basic land type among lands they control. Then Collapsing Border deals 3 damage to that player. So the effect that you're intending to get off of this card is likely going to be terrible in the Commander format, okay? It does punish players for playing monocolored decks, which I don't think you really need to go after people. For me, I would more lean towards punishing players for playing lots of colors. So in that situation, this is bad. However, this is actually a pretty darn good card in a lot of situations, okay? One of the situations this is good in is the fact that it's dealing 3 damage to that player no matter what, right? The fact that you're gaining life and then losing life. So if someone has, again, a 3-color deck, they're going to be down nothing. They're going to end up having the exact same amount of life on their upkeep as they did at the start of the turn. Nothing's going to change. However, this effect is having that player lose life and then gain life. So if you have an effect or a deck that wants your opponents to be losing life, this will do that because, of course, damage causes loss of life. If you have a deck that wants your opponents to be taking non-combat damage, this is actually really good, right? So if I have a Chandra's Incinerator in play, which of course is an auto-include in a non-combat damage theme, what's going to happen on my opponent's upkeep, assuming they have 3 basic lands in play, is they're going to gain 3 life for their 3 basic land types. Then I'm going to shoot them for 3 damage, and my Chandra's Incinerator will see that I've shot them for 3 damage. They're still not going to have any life loss here, but they have been dealt 3 non-combat damage, so now I'll be able to shoot one of their creatures, right? So this is actually pretty darn good in one of those themes, right? If you're playing a Torbrand deck, now this is dealing 5 damage to them, right? So it gets a lot better in those non-combat damage themes. And also, why I really like this card in a very specific theme, it is a red enchantment that is gaining life. How many red cards out there are gaining life? Again, even if you're breaking even here, this is still going to gain life. If I have a Well Lost Dreams in play and I have even just, I'd say, a 2-color deck, on my upkeep, I will gain 2 life and then take 3 damage. So now I'm down a life, but that will trigger my Well Lost Dreams. I can pay 2 mana and draw 2 cards off of it, right? So even though it is fringe, it is still very rare to see a red card that is gaining life. All right, Cold Storage, 4 mana artifact. Pay 3, exile target creature you control. That's right, you're just exiling a creature you control. However, you can sacrifice this guy and return each creature card exiled with Cold Storage to the battlefield under your control. Now, this can be very mana intensive. This is a way to protect your creatures. I know people will say 7 mana to protect my commander, right? I mean, I guess, but you can use it to protect a bunch of things, right? I can pay 4 mana, have this come into play, and yes, then on a later date, if someone is casting a board wipe, I can pay 3 mana, exile my commander, and then at my leisure, whenever I want, sacrifice this to bring it back into play. It is a blink effect, right? This is a colorless blink effect. There's not that many of those. So if you're in a deck that doesn't blink very well, which of course, I guess outside of white and blue, not a lot of colors really do that very well. This is a way to blink your creatures. Again, it is a very expensive way, yes, but it is a way. And if you have a commander that you want to be leaving the battlefield all the time, and in fact, I used to have this in my Nadir deck because there was a commander that I wanted to essentially sort of be blinking because it has the leaves the battlefield trigger. I had this in there. Pay 3 mana, have it leave the battlefield, and you could use it on your other creatures as well, right? I got a Ravenous Chupacabra in play. Let's have that guy leave the battlefield. And then I can just sacrifice this, of course, at instant speed and get those creatures back. I also had this in my Rona deck a long time ago when I had a Rona deck, and it's extra good there. Well, I mean, if you're doing the blinking theme, which I was in that deck, because of course your commander can get artifacts out of the graveyard essentially, right? They can get those historic cards back. This is a historic card, so you can sacrifice it and then get it back later with your Rona. Again, very fringe card, but it definitely can fit nicely into certain themes. Let's talk about Corrosion. This is a card, again, I've talked about quite a bit on my channel. And again, what's the actual ruling here? I'm not sure. I could be wrong about this. I could be right. Either way, I still think it's a pretty good card. So 1 black, red enchantment has cumulative upkeep 1. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a rust counter on each artifact target opponent controls, then destroy each artifact with mana value less than or equal to the number of rust counters on it. Artifacts destroyed this way can't be regenerated, and when it leaves the battlefield, remove all rust counters from it. So I will first say, as I always do, cumulative upkeep scares people away. It's not that bad. The first time you play this, you don't have to pay anything. On your first upkeep, you pay 1, not a big deal. I have said in the past that this will destroy all token artifacts in play on your first upkeep because it destroys all artifacts with mana value less than or equal to the number of rust counters on it, which means if something has 0 rust counters on it and it has a mana value of 0, it should get destroyed. I don't know if that actually works or not. I've had people tell me that's wrong. It only destroys things with rust counters on them, even if they cost mana value 0, and it just ignores everything without rust counters on it. I've never had an official ruling on this. I could be wrong. I could be right. Either way, this is a really good card, especially especially in the current meta. As we all know, artifact tokens are everywhere in the commander format. Everywhere. Of course, the treasure tokens is the big ones. We also got the clue tokens. We also got the food tokens. It seems like every set we're coming out with new food token stuff. We got the blood tokens. We got junk tokens now, I think from Fallout, right? We got so many artifact tokens now that this card, I think, is actually getting better in the commander format. On my first upkeep, I just pick the guy who is doing the artifact token theme. Maybe he's got a Smothering Tithe in play, whatever the case may be. I pay 1 mana for the upkeep, and then I just destroy all the artifact tokens he controls. And again, if it doesn't work the way that I originally thought, where it's not destroying everyone else's artifact tokens, that might be an upside as well, because now you can use it as a political tool, right? On the following upkeep, maybe I pick a different guy. Maybe I just wait until I destroy all the artifact tokens in play, and then I just let this thing go to the cumulative upkeep. This is a pretty fantastic sort of sweeper for artifact tokens, which of course in the commander format, they're all over the place. Next up at number 6, Crackdown, 2 and a white enchantment. Non-white creatures with power 3 or greater don't untap during their controller's untap step. There is zero reason to not put this in your mono-white deck, I guess, other than the fact that it's a little bit of a pricey card maybe. Of course, non-white creatures aren't hit by this, so in a mono-white deck, none of your creatures will be hit by this, I guess, unless you have a big artifact creature. So in an artifact creature theme in mono white, maybe it's not great. But other than that, it's probably going to be fantastic. If you're in any theme where you have low power of creatures, right? And of course, there's lots of themes like that in white. Maybe you're doing soldier tribal. Those tend to be small. Maybe you're doing spirit tribal. Those tend to be pretty low on power as well. Again, if they're white, it's not going to hit them at all. If you have a spirit tribal commander that has a power greater than 3, but also is white, it's not going to be hit by this, right? So there's probably a lot of decks out there that there's zero downside for you at all. And of course, for your opponents, probably going to be a lot. Let's talk about Credit Voucher. Coming in at number 7, 2 mana artifact. Pay 2 and tap, sacrifice Credit Voucher, shuffle any number of cards from your hand in your library, then draw that many cards. So funny enough, this is very similar to the Conch Horn in what it's doing. It's a little bit different, and there is a little bit of different situations you could use it in, although I would imagine there's probably a few decks that could use both of these cards to similar effect. This is essentially a wheel in colorless option, right? Again, that's why I like to mention these cards. If I'm in a red deck, I got lots of options for wheeling, but if I'm not, then I don't, right? And of course, this is a shuffle in effect, so you're not going to get discard triggers here, but you are going to get draw triggers. So here is the ways that I think you could probably use this card. Again, because it's an artifact that's sacrificing, you could just very easily throw it into your artifact deck, get it back later just to keep wheeling away cards you don't want. It is shuffling into your library. So again, just like with the Conch Horn, where you have things in your hand that you actually want in your library for whatever reason, it can do that. But of course, the best way to use this as a colorless option is in a deck where you want draw triggers, right? I got 7 cards in hand, I shuffle it away, and I get 7 draw triggers for whatever reason. That's also a great place to use a card like this. Next up at number 8, we're going to talk about Creepy Doll. 5 mana artifact creature construct, indestructible 1/1. So we have a 5 mana 1/1. That's not very good, but it's indestructible, okay, which is really important. And also, when Creepy Doll deals combat damage to a creature, flip a coin. If you win the flip, destroy that creature. So I'm going to make a case for this card outside of a coin flipping deck, which is obviously the place where people would think to put this, right? Well, no, actually, I don't think this is good in a coin flipping deck. If I was making a deck where I wanted lots of coin flipping going on, I don't think I would put this in there, because there's a chance you don't get any coin flipping at all, right? Whenever Creepy Doll deals combat damage to a creature, flip a coin. So if I attack with this, why would my opponents block it? It's just a 1/1. So you're likely never going to get any coin flipping off this. I actually don't think it's good in a coin flipping deck, and that's probably where people are playing it. Where are you going to play this card? You're going to play this card in a pillow fort deck, or any deck where you don't want to be attacked, right? So if you're in any colors, again, this is a colorless option. I'm in a deck where I don't want to be attacked, and I'm not in the typical pillow fort colors, like particularly white. This is actually a pretty good option for just stay off me, bro. I don't want to get attacked. Why? Because if your opponents attack you with a creature, of course, you're going to just block with your Creepy Doll, which is indestructible. And when you block with it, you're going to be dealing combat damage to that creature, and then you're going to flip a coin. And if you win the flip, you destroy that creature. So if I have, say, my commander, and it's not indestructible, I'm going to attack the guy with the Creepy Doll, but he's obviously going to block with his Creepy Doll, and maybe my commander is going to get destroyed. So yeah, I'm not going to attack him. I'm going to attack somebody else, actually, right? And that's going to be the case with everybody. Nobody wants to lose their creature. This is kind of like like having an indestructible death touch creature in play. Yeah, there's a chance that they don't lose their creature, but there's a chance they do lose their creature. So why would they want to attack you? They'll just attack somebody else, right? This card is actually a fantastic deterrent. Now, I will say, if you're in a deck where you want to be getting in for damage, it also is good at that. Again, it's almost like having death touch on your creature, right? Nobody wants to block a death touch creature because they're going to lose their creature in combat. The same can be true here, and you don't have to worry about losing your creature in combat either. So it actually is fantastic this way. Just think of this card as a indestructible death touch creature that you can either just have it sit and play and deter your opponents from attacking you, or very easily get in for damage with it. Next up, let's talk about Crime and Punishment. Fantastic split card. In fact, probably one of the best split cards out there, in my opinion. It really doesn't see a lot of play in the format. It is 3 colors, of course. You got to be playing Abzan colors in order to put this in your deck. But if I'm playing an Abzan deck, this is going in there because it has 2 fantastic sides to it that are going to be great in every commander game. So the Crime side, 3 white and a black sorcery. Put target creature or enchantment card in an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So what commander game do you not want to be doing that, right? Like, I'll take my opponent's Vorinclex, put it into play under my control. I'll take my opponent's Smothering Tithe or Rhystic Study, put them into play under my control, right? At any point during a game, I imagine your opponent is going to have a really great creature or enchantment in their graveyard that you want to put into play under your control. The punishment side, also, you're always going to be wanting to use in every commander game. X, black, and a green sorcery. Destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with mana value X. So, a couple of things of note here, because of course we have seen effects like this a lot in the commander format. The wording here, though, is very particular. Of course, it's hitting exactly mana value X, which can be really, really important. That way you can avoid hitting things of your own. And in fact, if your opponent just has that one really annoying, troublesome thing on the table that you got to get rid of, you just pick that mana value just to get rid of it. It might be worth it, right? You're playing a graveyard deck. They have a Rest in Peace. You just pick X is 2 here. So that's 4 mana total. You get that Rest in Peace off the battlefield and whatever else might be in play that's mana value 2. However, once again, where I really like effects like this is you pick X is 0 and get all those tokens off the battlefield. This is, in my opinion, one of the best token destroyers in the entire format. Any artifact or creature token, I guess enchantment tokens as well. I'm not sure how many of those there are out there, but any artifact or creature token that is mana value 0, you're going to completely wipe the board for only 2 mana. Pretty fantastic. And lastly today, let's talk about Cranial Archive. And this is a card that always kind of stuck out in my head because I just love the art. Really fantastic art in this card. But I never really used it because I was like, okay, as a graveyard hate card, it's not great. There's actually a lot of better options. However, again, we're in that situation where the very unique wording here is super important. So another 2 mana artifact, pay 2 mana and exile it. Target player shuffles their graveyard into their library and draw a card. So of course, we got lots of effects like this. People prefer like a Relic of Progenitus or just tons of options for graveyard hate stapled on an artifact. You get the card draw off of it so it replaces itself. Why would you want to play this one? Well, you're going to play this one for one very specific reason, or I guess 2 very specific reasons that fall into the same category. This is target player shuffles their graveyard into their library. There actually is almost no effects like this, at least colorless options, that are available for you to use on yourself. What if you don't want to exile graveyards? You want to save your own graveyard, right? This is a way, a colorless option for saving your own graveyard. And I know people will say, okay, well, I'll just use a Felden's Cane. Sure, but Felden's Cane is shuffle your graveyard into your library, right? That's what makes Cranial Archive unique. Cranial Archive is I can save my own graveyard. So in case somebody exiles it or something like that, or I just have a lot of really important cards in my graveyard and I want to shuffle in, right? There's a lot of reasons you might want to shuffle your graveyard into your library. Maybe I'm in a self-mill strategy and I'm self-milling, but I'm getting down to like 2 or 3 cards in my library. So now I want to shuffle in again, right? A lot of self-mill decks will play cards like that. Again, Elixir of Immortality. Cranial Archive is doing that. But what Cranial Archive is doing that Felden's Cane and Elixir of Immortality are not doing is it is also graveyard hate. My opponent's playing a self-mill strategy and you're filling their graveyard, right? They're playing a Sidisi deck or something. Now I can screw them by shuffling their graveyard back into their library in response to a living death or something like that. This is actually, funny enough, a very unique card that I think a lot of people overlook because it's like, okay, well, there's better ways to shuffle my graveyard into my library, or there's better graveyard hate options in the format. Yes, but not a lot of cards are graveyard hate, and also I shuffle my graveyard in as well if I want to. Really unique effect, and I like it a lot in the Commander format. That is it. That is all. 10 more cards that I think you guys could be considering for your Commander decks. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.